Good afternoon, everybody. It is unbelievably October 17th, 2024. It is exactly 4 o'clock. This is the Finance Committee. This meeting will be video recorded and broadcast over local access channel 8 and through the town website at www.eastham-ma.gov. And we have some guests here today. We introduced themselves earlier, Brooke and Matt, and they are going to give us, I should say, a little presentation on the special ed that I had originally seen when you gave the same presentation to the elementary school committee a while back. And I thought it was important that the Finance Committee see it and ask questions if they have it. Any questions? Especially given the override that we had this past year as far as special ed was concerned. And before you begin, I just have a question. Do you want people to ask questions while you proceed, or would you prefer people to wait till the end and ask questions towards the end?
If you could do it at the end, that would be great.
Okay. So I'll let you proceed, and thank you very much for bringing it to us and giving your comments.
Certainly. I'm going to share my screen here. Hey. All right, so thank you very much for having me today. I'm here to talk about special education, as this is a topic that is filled with jargon and a lot of technical terms. And in the industry, we assume that everyone knows what we're talking about, but we understand that's not the case. So this is an effort to have a base level understanding as to what's going on. It's very complex and murky, but this does give an overview and a structure to it. Most importantly, it does provide a level of understanding of the process of moving through it. So special education, first off, breaking it down, the term 504 and special education, they're not interchangeable. Okay, both start with a suspected disability. Okay, how we treat that disability determines if we go 504 or special ed. 504 is simply accommodations, which could be accessible to most anyone. Special education is there a disability that prevents the child from accessing grade level curriculum. If that is the case, the child can be referred to the process. Now, special education process is highly regulated both at the federal and state level. There's not a lot of independent thought in the process. It's scripted with flowcharts and definitions, and even as to what can be considered a disability. So if a person, community member, parent, doctor, anyone feels that a child can't access the curriculum because of a disability, they can be referred to us. And the school will then take that referral, and we would offer the opportunity to have the child assessed or tested by a school psychologist, occupational therapist, whoever the area of expertise is in that suspected disability. They perform the tests, and they determine how far apart from the average student the student is performing. From there, the process does continue where we develop an IEP and make a proposal for that. Now, we call this the initial referral. All IEPs are good for 3 years. After 3 years, the process starts all over again and the child needs to be assessed. So just because a child is on an IEP at age 7 does not mean at age 10 they will be, or at age 17. Every 3 years, we must assess with the same statistical benchmarks and assessments used in the very beginning. So hopefully the child does make process and that's not necessary anymore, and those supports can be removed. So again, child is referred, they're assessed, they may be determined found eligible for specialized instruction, which is the definition of special ed, and the district proposes an IEP. We then give the parent the option to accept or reject. Just because we propose it doesn't mean the parent necessarily has to accept it. That's where some dialogue goes back and forth, and together as a team. The team is made up of administrator, general ed teacher, special ed teacher, everyone that's involved in the treatment of that child, together to develop a plan that everyone accepts. Now, there's times where it's not accepted. There are mechanisms in place both at the local and state level should a child not should a parent not accept an IEP. So with all this process, the goal is to have the child access grade level curriculum with the least amount of supports possible. That is our goal, not to give them everything and to do the work for them. If they're performing here, our supports are here. And as they continue to progress, supports decrease. Okay. So continuing on, maybe not. Okay. All right. So here are some key terms that get thrown around a lot with special ed, or you may hear on the news. One is called child find. Child find states that the district is responsible for identifying the students that may be eligible for special education services. We can't sit and wait for someone to not perform at grade level. We can't sit and wait for someone to come to us. We have an obligation to reach out into the community members to continually evaluate students throughout the year to determine if someone needs specialized instruction to catch it as early as possible. Now, when providing these services, we refer to something called LRE, which means the least restrictive environment. I've mentioned this before, just because we can give every support under the sun doesn't mean that that's what's appropriate. A student should be performing at their level with the amount of supports that are necessary for them in their least restrictive environment. For some students, that may be simply having an additional, for example, an English program like Wilson, helping with reading. Or for other students, it may be a specialized program at another school. And for other students, they're least restrictive, maybe living in a residential program where they're receiving around-the-clock care and instruction. But it all is individualized. Now, these services, we're required to provide them from the day the child turns 3 until they either graduate or turn 22, whichever happens first. Now, I say that we're responsible at age 3. Our responsibility actually starts at 2 years and 9 months, because at 2 years and 9 months, that's when early intervention will start to give us referrals. And that gives us 3 months to the day to have a plan accepted in place to start. We cannot wait till 3 years and 4 days. We must start at 3 years exactly. So very, very regulated. So when we develop these plans, the IEPs, the individualized education plan, everything is based on data. We do not add a support or an intervention or a goal or anything with some sort of either evaluation or a data metric that is accepted to indicate that a child is progressing or not progressing. So there's not a lot of, what's the phrase I'm looking for? There's not a lot of commentary or just independence. I think this child just needs this. We always look at what is the data to support what a student needs to make progress. And again, this leads into just because someone has a program doesn't mean they get it. And just because we don't have a program doesn't mean that a child doesn't get it. What the child receives is what the data indicates that they need, not what we have to offer. We're responsible to provide programming. And if we don't have the programming, we either have to make it or find a program that's close enough and send the child to it. So our responsibility is to give the child what they need, regardless of what our resources are, whether in manpower or finance. So I mentioned before that there's not always agreement when we're making plans or having our annual or our triannual re-eval meetings. So what if there is a disagreement or a parent says, I've had it with this IEP, it's not working. We need to do this over again. Well, we can always come back to the table and we can always talk about making things better. But if there's still disagreement, there's a mechanism at the state level called the Bureau of Special Education Appeals. And that's where it can go from having a facilitator from the Department of Ed come down to run the meetings, because perhaps there may be some egos involved or personal issues may come about, to then move up to a mediator, which would literally have parents and the district in 2 separate rooms and would go back and forth to find middle ground that's accepted. Sometimes even that doesn't work. If that doesn't work, they go to hearing, which basically would be the equivalent of going to court, where the hearing officer would interpret the proposed IEP and the laws and to determine whether or not we are providing a free and appropriate public education, and will make the final ruling. When that happens, there's no appeal to that. That is the end. We do our best to avoid going that route because it draws out the process a long time. It incurs a lot of legal costs, and it also runs the risk of damaging the relationship with the family. So we want to handle things as close to the school level as possible because it's the school that's actually working with the child. Now, DESE does, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, does rate districts based on all the metrics that we look at, graduation dropouts, how many students are in sub-separate programming versus inclusion programming, and those are called district determinations. And it's rated as meeting expectations all the way down to needing intervention. Eastham is meeting requirements, so we're doing our job by the metrics of the state. We are meeting all the requirements, which is a very good thing because not all districts are in that situation. All right, so let's bring it to Eastham real quick. So Eastham has all the in general ed classroom interventions for special ed, but they also have a substantially separate classroom for students with social emotional difficulties. Substantially separate means that they have the opportunity to not integrate with their peers. They can be totally separate with peers of a similar profile. Also, Eastham has a pre-kindergarten classroom, which is what we call integrated. Integrated means that there's this what we call a 7-8 split, 7 students with disabilities to 8 peer partners. So if we break down the population, we include pre-K, everybody soup to nuts, 178 students. If you look into that, 18% of that total is identified as students with disabilities. The state average is 20. So we're pretty close to the state average. We're not significantly higher, a little bit below.
Some people might think we might be a little bit higher.
So we're at 18% as of about 2 weeks ago when I pulled these numbers. And then I just quickly looking at it, broke down what those disabilities are. So, you know, health, specific learning, developmental delay, communication, autism, emotional. That breakdown in what is 19% one year and 22% the next year, that will ebb and flow year to year, depending on who moves up from kindergarten and who moves out and going to the middle school. At Eastham Elementary, some of the specialized IEP services or special ed would be specialized instruction, speech and language pathologist, occupational therapy, physical therapy, the use of a paraprofessional, counseling as what's also referred to as a therapeutic milieu. This would be our social emotional classroom. A therapeutic milieu simply means that from the moment the day starts to the end of the day, everything is therapeutic in nature. There is counseling supports, real in the moment feedback on behavior to positive reinforcement systems, level systems. It is every moment of the day is therapeutic in mindset. Very intensive. So some just general updates. We have a new IEP that rolled out this year for everyone in the entire state. Basically, the difference is the formatting, what is listed where on the form. We broadcasted out to parents last year. We did a bunch of training with staff. It's been live since September. We've had a couple small hiccups, but it's been more along the lines of like technology support, our program that we use, our student information system. They're a vendor, they have to support it, and they're not just servicing us, they're servicing many towns. So, but other than just small technical hiccups, it's rolling out very well. We have not heard any parent concerns about it. As I mentioned, in Eastham, they do have a positive behavior shaping system, as well as individualized and program-specific supports. That would be the STEP classroom. Currently, Eastham has 2 students attending inter-district programming. So other districts have classrooms that are intensive services. If Eastham doesn't have enough to have their own classroom, those students can go to Brewster, for example, to receive those supports. And we have 4 students in pre-K attending in Brewster. Currently, there's only 1 student who is attending an out-of-district specialized intensive program. Eastham does consult with our local BCBA vendor, supporting teachers, creating plans, doing functional behavioral assessments, as well as providing just an independent critical lens as to how we're intervening with students.
Just break down BCBA.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. See, jargon. BCBA is a board certified behavior analyst. It's a very, very high level of licensing when working with students with behaviors. For social emotional, Eastham uses Second Step as well as the Yale ruler system, and which covers safety, bullying prevention, and social emotional instruction. Okay, wrapping up. These are things that everyone is facing, not just on this end of Cape Cod. This is across the state. So in the last 2 years, we've seen the cost of specialized programs skyrocket, anywhere 12 to 15%-ish, depending upon the program. Collaborative programs also have gone up 6 to 8%, and that includes transportation by the collaborative as well. The rates for next year aren't released yet, but we are seeing a trend that specialized instruction is getting expensive very quickly.
When do they when do those rates get?
Fairly soon, right around the first of the year-ish.
Mhm.
As soon as we find that out, we build that into our proposed budget. On this end of the Cape, there is a serious transportation shortage, shortage of drivers, shortage of vendors. There are some instances where we have to call in vendors as far as West Bridgewater to drive to this end of the Cape to bring students to Walpole to specialized programs. Just because the student is far away, we still are required to provide the transportation, and we seek anywhere that we can to make it happen. And one note about transportation is there's a law that states that door to door should not exceed 60 minutes. Well, from Eastham to anything over the bridge is over an hour.
Which is the 60 minutes.
Correct. So we're transparent with families that we're going to exceed that. But just because we're exceeding it, we can't then add 6 more kids on that bus because we're breaking the 60 minutes anyways. We still are required to do our best to keep it as short as possible, even if we exceed by the hour. In terms of the transportation costs with independent vendors, there's no regulation. They can charge whatever they want. It's a free market. So you're going to see some will jump up high and some won't. So our vendors that we choose from does ebb and flow. Higher education institutions are also putting out fewer licensed professionals like occupational therapists and speech and language pathologists. Well, as a result of that, there's more competition amongst districts over a smaller population of professionals. So we have to be very competitive with our salary and benefits to attract talent, especially this far into the Cape. And last, not a surprise, there's still a lingering effect of the pandemic. Our students in pre-K now were born just after or during the pandemic itself. So the full impact, we're not through it yet. It's going to take quite some time, but at least we're aware of it. And that is the presentation. And I'm happy to answer any questions as best I can.
First, thank you very much for both coming, and I appreciate that. Are there any questions from the finance committee members that they might have?
I have one.
What? You would go, okay, go ahead.
I'm just curious about the aggregate size of the classes in Eastham Elementary. The average number of kids in each classroom.
I would say, I mean, it varies from grade level to grade level, but I would say like 15 per class, or, you know, something 30 per grade level.
So it's one teacher, two teachers per.
grade level, yeah.
Wow, when I taught school, it was 1 and I had 38 kids. Okay. That's gratifying and good, I think.
I've got 2. If you go back to one of your early slides, 33 kids have been classified. Who does classification?
So when we're identifying students with disabilities, it's all through the referral process. So if a student is referred, we evaluate them. It could be a school psychologist. It could be a occupational therapist. It could be whoever is in that specialty field of disability. And that information is then brought to a team that is chaired by a school psychologist at the elementary level. And we follow a scripted process by the Department of Ed to determine whether or not they're eligible to receive services. It's a flow chart, essentially.
Got you. So it's incumbent upon me as the parent to get somebody to write a letter?
No,
No.
it could be I could see something's not working right. I have a concern. I could make a referral, principal could make a referral, parent could make a referral,
Teacher,
teacher, anyone.
anyone.
Mhm.
Okay. And the other question is, you heard about this when we were going through the budget last year and the special ed costs, and you got your own line in the town warrant. Is it same number of kids this year, you think? More kids out of district?
So here's the difficult part. As I mentioned, 2 years and 9 months is when we start to hear about our incoming pre-K.
Okay.
And then we have 3 months to develop a plan. I have no idea in the next 6 months who's going to turn 2 years and 9 months. I can look at the trends from the last several years. But who moves into the district at the pre-K level? We find out and then we must respond to. We can't plan that out. Once they're in the system, we can project who may need what based on their current functioning. And we also know who is moving up to the region at 6th grade.
That was gonna be my next question. Do you know who's gonna age out?
Yes.
for-
Correct.
So that number going down?
As of this moment, I don't foresee it ballooning up.
What do you
Well,
mean by
couple-
ballooning?
Significant.
Yeah,
You know, I-
People could move in. Yeah.
I understand.
A couple things that I was gonna say. So I think that was actually the case last year. It's not a matter of maybe the number of participants. It's someone who moves in that you're unaware of
Right,
that
right.
happens.
Mhm.
And then B, what level of service do they need? So
Right.
that somebody moved in and they needed a very intensive level of service.
Mhm.
That couldn't be accommodated at the elementary school and has lots of transportation involved with it.
We have children moving in with grandparents in the area with their family, and we just pick up the plan and carry the ball with it.
Before I lose my train of thought, just one thing if you could speak about, we do historic, we tend to forget about these things, so it goes back a long ways. But over the years, we put in a lot of mechanisms to lower the cost and the burden, and a couple of those things are, a lot of these services are offered at the district level, not at the local elementary school level, as so that's a cost share, so to speak, amongst the district. But even some of the services, Cape Cod Collaborative provides a large portion of these services, which is a municipal entity, and maybe you could just speak a little bit about both of those things.
Certainly, Cape Cod Collaborative, made up of all the local towns, provides a myriad of services from related service, OT, PT, speech, professional development, to having specialized programs for students. They opened up a classroom for students with more complex medical needs, which is a very difficult thing to find, especially in this part of the state. Collaboratives are beneficial because they respond to district needs. So we meet on a monthly basis, all the special education directors with the collaborative. And we have an opportunity to say, this is what's coming. Can you plan and develop something? And if they can't, we're able to work with other districts as well. So there is strength in numbers in that regard.
It's almost
Regional share.
almost like a regional service.
Mhm.
And I forget, it's been a while since I've looked into school stuff. But I believe you still pay an assessment to participate in the collaborative, but then you pay a fee for service for specialized
Correct.
services.
There's membership fees and then there's service fees.
And how about at the district level, what you're doing at the district versus at each individual elementary school?
Certainly. So at the elementary level, Brewster has some specialized programs for students that have the profile of autism that require some higher intensive, what we call ABA, applied behavioral analysis. Students that would be in a separate classroom, heavy focus on communication supports. So students with that profile can receive services in Brewster. Eastham has the social emotional classroom, and currently that meets our needs. We don't have some disabilities that other towns are facing with. For example, we're not facing a large population of deaf and hard of hearing students or visually impaired students. If that were the case, then we'd change our programming to meet our need.
I have a question. I think you said there's one student that's out of district.
Correct.
Is that on the Cape? Are they off Cape? Is it a far commute to?
I can only tell you that it's a ways.
Yeah, we have to be really cautious not to say anything that
anything.
might be identifiable.
Yes.
And if I can just come back to Paul, your question, sometimes things happen as children grow and manifestations happen that we don't see coming. So not all things are predictable. You know, some things are, but then there are other things that happen. Say, for example, the grade 5 level or grade 6 level that you've never seen coming, and suddenly something happens and you have to take care of that. So not all things are predictable for sure. I mean, the things that you're talking about, the less than 3 years, that's all kind of predictable. Or as we're watching our students go through and age through into the middle school, that's predictable. But some of the things that we've been up against Eastham, and I don't know, Bill, if you want to speak to this, but I would say have been very unpredictable. Would you say that's true, Bill, in the last maybe 2 years?
Yeah, and I would say just people moving in, to the town,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
they have some students with special needs that we had no idea about until they arrived.
Mhm.
And having to go through the process of evaluating and identifying. whether
Determining what they need.
Yes, exactly.
So
We
with
do
that-
keep eyes on our preschool though, too, which is integrated, which Matt referred to,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
kids that are there, that would, then transition into our school, and depending on what their needs are as well, if we can meet them here, or maybe
Mhm.
it's another specialized program.
Someplace else.
Um,
Is there flexibility within the staff? Like if 3 or 4 new students came in all of a sudden, is the staff able to absorb it, or is it something you have to quickly hire people, or?
That's a great question, Patty. Yes. And at this point, as Matt referenced as well, it's challenging, to find, strong educators and para educators. And so, but, fortunately, we are able to kind of scramble around and make adjustments and, and meet student needs. But I will say, yes, it's definitely a challenge. To find specialized trained para educators, let's say, to support and special ed
Mhm.
teachers as well. So, but we have been able to meet those needs.
I have a couple, excuse me, a couple questions. What exactly, can you explain to me, the financial aspect of paying for all of this and what the state pays and when it pays and what this whole process of getting the monies?
It's
and when-
complicated. It's
I'm
very-
sorry?
It's very complicated, so that's a great question. Do you want to start and fill in?
Two main mechanisms. One is the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities. It's IDEA grants, federal grants, that is solely based upon the number of students in each of the towns. Number goes up, funding goes up, number. goes
Just
down,
the
funding goes
basic
down.
number of students you're talking about.
Correct.
It has
With
nothing to,
disabilities.
oh,
Students with
okay.
Disabilities.
Okay.
If that number goes down, our funding goes down.
Mhm.
Okay, that does not come in until August, which makes it very difficult planning wise. Okay, just transparency. The other main mechanism for funding is what we call circuit breaker reimbursement.
Mhm.
And that is where if a student has a very significant cost, it's 4 times the average per pupil expenditure. I think this year, the magic number is around $52,000. So after you have spent $52,000, you get 75 cents on the dollar back when we file at the end of the year, which is in July. And then there's disbursement schedules throughout the year where that money is dispersed.
So when you're putting together your budget for the year and you might get a child that comes in after the school year begins, which was not known when you were putting the budget together,
Correct.
that can cause all sorts of financial issues.
And it does,
Oh, yeah.
it does, yeah.
Well, it happened.
It
last
last-
year.
it
Yeah, I
did-
know,
I was gonna
I
say,
know.
that's what you saw happen last year in both East Hammond and Brewster. And that was one of the reasons too why the various communities, I think you're the last one up right now, to set up a stabilization fund just for this kind of thing, for
Mhm.
these momentary glitches when things happen, but very often when we get those kinds of things in, so I know Orleans, for example, is going to be talking about the amount that they're aiming to put into their account, Orleans Elementary, for example. What we're seeing is very often it's about 250 to 300,000 in terms of the cost of sending the child out, and then about another 50,000 in transportation. So I think, you know, the goal, I think, for our stabilization funds that are out there, Brewster has one now.
Stabilization fund, because we've
Just for
that's
special
something that
education.
I'm interested in
Yeah.
here.
Just for special education.
Mhm.
And we just turned some money back to Brewster, for example, because they actually kind of they had something else happen and they ended up having a little bit of extra money. They're taking all of that money and this upcoming town meeting and putting it into their stabilization.
Stabilization fund.
And initially they put about $100,000 in, and we had to go back that first year and ask for 73,000 of it back because we had the very kind of thing that you're talking about
Mhm.
happen. Wellfleet is putting theirs on the, if it's not on this warrant, which I think it might be, it will be on the next warrant, but they're looking at setting one up as well.
Mhm. Do parents that have children that need the needs we're talking about, do they look around for locations to live in order to provide their children with the best that one area might have versus another area? I mean,
Yes, I do.
if I had a child that needed what you're talking about, I would want to make sure that that child got the best that was available. It might not be where I'm currently living.
Correct.
Mhm.
Happens a lot. That phrase, if you build it, they will come. It's true. If you
Mhm.
build good programming, people will seek it out.
Mhm.
Have you found that to be true? Does that sort of happen here when people come in after the fact, not, you're talking about the 2.9 versus the 3, they're most likely living here, but the older people, older children, I should say.
I don't have enough information to really give you a good answer on that, because
Mhm.
this is only my second year within the district.
Mm.
My 9 years prior was in an urban area, and I very much found that to be true. But we do have several students that choice in that are special education students and do receive some specialized
Mhm.
services. So it could be implied that yes, people will come here for our services.
Mhm. And what's the difference in the cost that the state provides for versus special ed versus transportation? That's a totally different piece of a pot, isn't it? What you get for transportation?
So when I talked about the circuit breaker reimbursement,
Mhm.
that 52,000
Yeah.
threshold, well, you count in all your educational
Oh.
expenses and your
Oh,
transportation.
okay. Into the 52?
And then so let's just hypothetically say you spent $100,000, first 52 is removed.
Mm.
The 48,000, you get 75% of it back.
And if I could just mention too, it hasn't always been 75. We don't even know right now, for example, as we sit here, what our percentage is going to be next year. We don't find that out until generally January or February. So, I mean, I've seen it as low as in the high 40s. I don't know if you remember that back in 2004 and 8, somewhere around there. It was really, really low. Like it's sitting right now at a pretty high level, from my perspective, you know, so.
Does it change every year?
It pretty much, yeah. We get a number out that tells us this is the type of percentage that you can expect, but we don't
Mhm.
generally get that fed until like middle of budget season.
Can you remind me on the utilization of the circuit breaker? Is that, I mean, I know that, you know, in the situation when someone moves in, it's like a double whammy. Not only do you not know about them when they moved in, you're not gonna get the reimbursement to the following fiscal year either.
Right, that's correct.
But do you utilize the circuit breaker funds as almost like a revenue source of the budget, or do you direct charge costs to it?
No, generally through the budget.
Allocation?
Yeah.
Revenue, okay.
And like, for example, like last year, we would say, okay, we can pull $32,000 out of circuit breaker to help offset his.
So you're gonna
budget. So
incur the
that's-
cost
Is that a
up
problem?
front, but you'll get some money in the future that can
That's
help.
exactly right.
And
The
then,
following year.
The
yeah.
following year.
Yeah, you're always sounds like you're always a year behind.
You are,
Mhm.
that's exactly right.
but to your
I'm
point,
not saying you're a year behind.
That hasn't changed since I taught. It's always that way.
You can say I'm a year behind.
but to your point, if we had the level of funding, so kind of the plan, given that we had a significant override largely due to the special ed costs, you know, in a perfect world, that those costs eventually will age out into the district and become a district cost. And then the elementary school budget, you know, if nothing else happens, would decrease. So our intention is to extend that the special ed budget at the elementary school decreases at some point in the future. You know, any other money we might have aside, you want to steward that decrease. And you always make sure that level of funding is available to you in case there's an increase again in the
That's
future.
exactly right.
So that's kind of what we're going to try to do.
Mhm.
See how everything else works out for us.
You just don't know.
Before
You don't know from year. Sometimes we don't know from week to week or day to day. We get phone calls and did not see that coming. It
Mm,
just happens.
So you mentioned the COVID situation. Have you found that that has really affected the students? I mean, I've read all sorts of articles about how that's affected the whole learning process that the students went through for those years that they were Zooming or not Zooming or doing all sorts of other things.
I mean, I have an opinion about it.
Yeah, please, you probably, you see them every day.
Right, and we're talking about that, but I think, you know, and we do screening, you know, for dyslexia, for, you know, state mandate. And to be honest with you, you know, if a disability presents itself, I don't think it has anything to do with COVID. Do you know what I mean? There could be gaps in learning and things like that. But a disability, you know, that's evaluated and identified, that child has that disability. Do you know what I mean? So we're kind of seeing that as well, you know, so it's like, you'd like to attribute, I think it's hard to really, to say, well, that's definitely COVID related, other than the fact that, you know, just gaps in learning, you know. Just third grade-
Anxiety and things of that, I think
Yeah, the
like
third
that.
grade cohort right now is kind of that class that was, you know, in preschool, you know, when COVID hit, and then they came back to school in kindergarten with wearing masks and being separate, and then the following year, they're in first grade, so those very important developmental
yes.
years for learning to read, you know?
Yeah, yes.
So.
And
You can't see anyone's mouth.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, what, Jackie?
Right, to
And you can't see anyone's mouth.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
the letter,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
we're seeing a significant increase in communication disabilities at pre-K level. So we know that's coming, so it allows us to plan for it. And as Bill mentioned, disabilities are there,
Yeah.
but we only provide services if the disability gets in the way of learning.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is, okay, so they may have a disability underlying, but that doesn't mean they'll need specialized instruction if we intervene early. But we're just seeing an increase now as they're walking in, but the hope is that with early intervention and services at the start, then we could mitigate some of that as they age up.
So I'm curious, you talked a lot about the data that you have to adhere to, and that data is the same for everybody. So did that data change after the pandemic? And if it didn't, how often do they, first of all, who's the they? Is it federal or is it state?
I'm gonna start with
Right.
this, and because I'm still want to spring a little bit from Mary's question. I would tell, I would agree with both gentlemen here, talking about post-COVID. But I would also tell you that in talking to other school districts, there are districts, especially in Western Massachusetts, that would tell you their kids have not yet caught up from the COVID time. We are not in that category, but there are districts out there that have not caught up to learning from that time. And so I think that speaks a lot for our district. So I would put that out there. To your point, Kate, I think one of the things that we did my first year here was, remember, we brought in iReady, Panorama, we brought in all kinds of different screeners so that those kids coming in from just as we came out of COVID and coming into us, we were able to put a lot of screeners in place very quickly and identify things immediately. And exactly as Matt said, we put things into place right away. So we did a lot of that 4 years ago.
Before we leave COVID, what is a primary
Bill, just put the thing.
approach? I'm sorry.
That's okay, I got you.
Thank you, Bill.
Was it a primary approach here to resort to online learning?
In Nauset, I don't think it was. I would say the district I was in during those years, that was all online for all virtual learning. You didn't do that here in Nauset. You had more of a hybrid going at that point in time. And so wherever you could bring students in, because you had, that was a benefit to the smaller classes, quite frankly. Because there, you know, you could easily get, you know, your 15 students or your 8 students or 10 students into a classroom with lots of room. The larger districts at that time didn't have that, you know, and so we had no choice but to go to virtual learning. So I think part of the reason why we came out of COVID as well as we did, talking about Nauset Public Schools, is because there was such a nice balance between hybrid and class that we were able to do that a whole lot of other districts could not
I was
do.
hearing a lot about pods. And
Yeah.
I have a friend that's a teacher in Barnstable, and they had little pods.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, yeah.
alternate days, and it was
Oh,
very
yeah.
creative. I mean, Bill had a whole setup outside. Remember that? Like
Yeah.
But Brooke is right, because of our small class sizes, we brought back probably 70% of the kids.
Mhm.
You know, and we had,
Good.
you know, at grade levels, we had online learning offered. We had to offer both. I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
back
Mhm.
then.
Another question,
Yeah, go
you
ahead.
mentioned, or you had on one of your charts, bullying. Do you find that's a major problem with special ed students? And if so, how do you handle it?
Major problem, no. Across the board, it is something that we look at as a learning opportunity. Just as all behaviors learned, if you learn a negative behavior, you also have to learn a more positive choice. So ESAM has the benefit of using two different curriculums in tandem to address that. I'll, Bill, please speak up, but I do not see it as a very significant issue in Eastham.
But to your point, though, not necessarily towards special ed students.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? Like bullying can happen across, you know,
Mm.
grade levels, across, you know, children, but not necessarily targeting, you know, students that are identified as special ed.
So is that a teaching opportunity for the bully?
Yes, I think that that's what he's saying.
Yes.
And if I can just say something too, I think that with the advent, now this is gonna show my age, but the advent of cell phones and all the other devices, the watches that our kids wear, you know, I would say that that's when you really saw the uptick in bullying, was more of cyberbullying at that point in time, when those phones started to come into the classrooms, you know. Now, of course, this year, you know, we're seeing, and this is more at the region, not at the elementary level, but you know, they are handing over their phones now when they walk through the door at the middle and high school level. So the middle school kids, their phones go into the lockers, the high school phones go into the caddies on the doors as soon as they walk into the classrooms. So that was just this year that we started that.
Given the cost of living out here and the cost of housing, how does that affect trying to find the people that you need to do the teaching here and the salaries that you have to pay compared to other parts of the state or other states?
It makes it very competitive. We have, cost of living is high across the board, especially on Cape Cod, further down you go. The pool of applicants is narrower than other parts of the state.
Mhm.
So we try to draw from as far as we can to get talent. Or sometimes people may choose to leave a district after 15 years for a change or an opportunity to grow professionally.
Mhm.
But it does impact who is willing to make a commute versus relocate here.
Yeah. I guess I have one other question. We were talking about the stabilization fund. Are other towns using any other type of arrangement for handling these types of expenses that come up without?
Not that
Being
I'm
aware of
aware of
them.
right now. No, I think this was, I think you talked about this actually well before I even walked through the door, the notion of everybody establishing, the four communities establishing. I just happened to be here when, you know, we put a push on it because, you know, we did see more special, not necessarily special education, but 504s, et cetera, come through the door after COVID. And that we were able to take care of. So there was a little bit of an uptick after COVID. There's no two ways about it, but and I think that's when, for me, as I'm looking at your budgets for the elementary, those are smaller budgets, like if you look at the whole grand scheme of
Mhm,
things.
mhm.
So if you have a $400,000 student that walks through the door, that's huge. And if you have
Huge.
two of them, then you're at $1 million.
That's right.
And so it was like, okay, it only makes sense from my perspective to be fiscally responsible and set aside like a piggy bank just for the potential what if. And so we've been pushing, you know, to encourage our communities for the last couple of years to do this. But that is the only thing between that and, you know, everything that we do that we're able to do, whether it's emergency or funding, if we can get some emergency funding. I don't think we've even been successful at that, though. I can't tell you how many times we made application for that last year and got denied, you know, so No, it's.
Yeah, what do
we
you,
the
what, I
best.
think that you did apply for the elementary school and you
We
didn't
did.
get, you didn't
No.
get it. And,
No, I
and
think in the,
I wasn't sure
I
why.
think we ultimately got $9,000 at one point in time, did we not? And we said, this is a drop in the bucket compared to what the money that we needed.
Mhm.
You know.
Mary too, and I will say, I mean, Jackie and I have been here probably a decade. I mean, it's my 10th year. And I can only really think of one time, I think, years ago that we had to come
Yep.
and ask for a little bit extra because of a student. So this is kind of a new situation. Like last year was totally a new situation for Eastham Elementary. And to be honest with you, and just to speak in generalities, but student needs are increasing. I think
Yeah, I know.
seen that, I think, in this presentation and even while we're here, so they are, and I don't necessarily, see them.
Decreasing.
Say no.
Mhm.
Very
And it's
scary
not,
world.
it's not COVID
Yeah.
specific, like
Yeah,
honestly.
no, I know. What do you think it is causing it?
Oh my gosh, I think there's so many.
No, I
things
mean,
that could be,
I
yeah.
mean,
I mean, if I was a parent, I would.
yeah.
Be my question, but it's hard to identify.
I don't think any of us know,
No.
quite frankly.
But I mean, I think all of us would probably agree that things, children today aren't, well, I know as a parent, when I sent my children to school, I never thought that they might be killed. That somebody's gonna come into the school and shoot them. And that never occurred to me when my children were growing up. And it's just one thing after another like that. It's just,
It's a
Well,
very
we
different
also
time.
had air raid drills. Do you remember going out into the
Oh, yes, I
hallway
remember
and
those.
sitting against the wall and doing this?
Right under the
So that when
desk.
the nuclear bomb went off, we'd be safe,
Yeah.
right?
well,
So,
I don't know.
Every generation has its
yes,
terrors.
yes, it's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Do you have, just my last question? I know we're supposed to get the enrollment information as of 10/1/20 for this year, 10/1/24. Have you received that or?
Yes, we pull it in from the schools, and so
Mhm.
yes, we have that available. We can certainly send it out to Jackie. And it gives, but it's not certified right now,
Right.
right? It's just the information.
It has
that
to be
we're currently-
certified by DESI?
It has, yes, and it hasn't been certified, but we can tell you what our numbers are showing,
Okay.
so that you've got a.
So we would have some,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that if it's available, would give us some idea of
Absolutely,
of
absolutely.
increase, decrease because of what we went through last year.
Absolutely. So no, happy to do that.
Okay, so you could
I'll
send
mention
it
that
to
to our
Jackie and
administrator.
Rich, yeah. Yep.
So much of it is the measurement, the comparison between where we
Oh,
are
yeah.
compared to
Other schools, the
Wellfleet,
other towns,
Brewster, Orlean.
right.
Our
Yeah.
enrollment has stayed,
I'm sorry?
our enrollment has stayed very stable
Steady.
in the
Yes.
last 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Matt's
I would
number
agree.
was accurate there with 170.
100, yeah.
I think when maybe the highest since I've been here is probably 190,
Mm.
including the preschool. though. So
Mm.
we've still been able to sustain having 2 teachers at each grade level. Our incoming kindergarten like class this year is probably got 25 or 6 in it, for 2 teachers.
Mm.
Our 3rd grade cohort is like 42,
Mm.
which is huge.
It
for
is big,
Eastham.
yeah.
20 something kids in a class is large for.
But it seems to, some classes seem to be bigger. People had babies at different
Yes,
times.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. we always-
So Mary, we watched those little bubbles, like I remember when I first got here, there was a bubble that got to 5th grade and I'm like, oh, next year's gonna be bad. Then they hop over to the regional budget, so you gotta be careful of those bubbles.
Oh, dear. Any other
No,
questions?
Thank you so much.
Oh,
This
this was
was
our
great.
pleasure. It's our pleasure.
Thank you very
Really
much. I
informative.
just thought that it was interesting when I heard your presentation before, and I thought it was, as they said, especially given our override this past year, I thought that it was important for you
Yeah,
to,
for sure.
for everybody here to hear what you had to say and understand it a little bit better.
Well, thank you for the
Yeah, yeah,
invitation.
yeah,
We
yeah,
really
yeah, yeah,
appreciate
yeah.
that.
And good luck. Yeah, you've announced that you're retiring at the end of this
Yes,
year.
yes. After 40 plus years as an educator and 20 plus as a superintendent,
Mhm, mhm.
I think it's time.
Yeah.
So,
Well, good luck with
Thank
your
you.
final year and thank you both for coming.
yeah, our pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome to stay, but I'm sure that.
You know that invitation. Much
Fun
appreciated.
one, if you have the chance.
Thank you very much for
Thanks.
coming,
No, I
Bill.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
support, obviously, as we go through this budget.
Yeah,
process for next year.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
Oh, dear. Okay.
What a great idea, Mary, to bring, I think the more communication,
Well,
the better.
I just think understanding
Well, it helps us too.
Under-
It's when
under-
people come
un-
up to us
yeah,
and say,
say,
you
well,
know,
what's this-
my
what's this?"
taxes went up, you know, part of it
Yeah.
is, we're all
I,
helping each
I'm
other.
a big, I believe in information.
I
Yeah, it was a
agree.
big item on the budget last year. It's nice to
Yeah.
have a little, little info on it.
It's
And to
hard.
have a classroom with that, with 2 teachers for 15 or 16 kids, that's amazing. That ratio,
Yeah.
it's great.
Okay, so I am going to proceed with the agenda here. And the agenda now calls for the minutes of the prior meeting, which was September 19th. And Mira is not here this week. I think she's on vacation, right? So I hope she's having a good time. So I do have the minutes that she prepared. And I didn't know whether anybody had, I guess I need a motion to approve them.
I'll make a motion.
And I'll second it.
That's, just a minute, that's, let me go
Roy.
here. So that's Roy,
Mhm.
and that was,
Kate,
Patty.
Okay.
Kate. Okay,
confused.
is there any discussion? I have I'll need to, tell Mira that when Jackie's last name is spelled incorrectly, in 4 places.
Ooh, good eyes.
But other than that, that's all I have. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended due to Jackie's name?
So move.
Okay, so is that Patty?
Second.
And you'll second it, Kate? Is
Yes,
that what you said? Okay. Any more discussion? All in favor?
I,
Aye, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0. Thank you very much, everybody. And we're now down to the fiscal year 24 year-end review, and I'll let Rich proceed from there.
Everybody got a copy that I'd sent out on email. Does anybody need one? Here, tonight?
Does anybody need a copy of the
if
fiscal
you've
year?
got any, great. If you have an extra one, that would be great. Thanks, Rich.
Any? I'll take one if you have. I have this
You
one,
need
but
one?
I'll take
Are
it.
you-
You have it?
Okay. I can't work with you.
You want two, just, you know.
No, because I like the color.
All right.
I do too. I'm the same way.
I don't have a color print.
I have a black and white printer.
Okay, I'll let Rich go.
So we had,
from here.
a good performance this year budgetarily, so I just want to go through that briefly. And the reason I'd like to do this is hopefully puts a pin in the prior fiscal year, prior to, in the next month, you'll be getting the capital budget draft looking forward. So we want to wrap up the prior year and take that information to help us inform our decision-making about the upcoming year's budget. And I will remind everybody, especially since we got some new members, that the key driver of performance for cities and towns, or one indicator of performance, is the generation of free cash. And in our case, it's super important because of a couple things. A lot of our free cash comes from short-term rental money that isn't budgeted previously. And that's going in, and we have a financial position that we take that free cash generated from short-term rentals to put into our wastewater stabilization fund. And then secondly, after that amount, whatever's left is really utilized to fund our capital plan. We do have about $400,000 of tax levy that's annually reoccurring to fund our capital plan. That largely covers our vehicle replacements, routine vehicles, not big things like ladder trucks or things like that, tractors, but pickup trucks and police cruisers and departmental equipment. But we have no money dedicated to facilities maintenance or other infrastructure type projects. So we utilize free cash for those. If we didn't have that free cash, we'd be doing a lot more borrowing than we already do. So I just want you, and we'll start talking about that next month with the capital plan. But I'm going to go to page 5 of the presentation. This kind of summarizes everything nicely from a financial perspective. Our general fund undesignated fund balance for the end of 2024. This is all estimated because we have to get things submitted to the Department of Revenue and they have to validate and certify these results, and of course, we also get audited. But on a pre-closing, pre-audited basis, our undesignated fund balance is $6.8 million, which represents about 17% of our operating budget. Not our overall budget, just our operating budget. Our target is to be between our general fund undesignated fund balance and our stabilization fund is 16.67%, which is a standard kind of set out by Standard and Poor's rating agencies. If you add in our stabilization fund, but now we gotta fine tune it a little bit. Because the amount's getting relatively significant for our wastewater stabilization fund is also included in that total. Our total stabilization is 4.6 million. So if you simply went to the DOR website and said, how much does Eastham have in a stabilization fund? You're going to see 4.6. But in our case, at the end of June 30th, 24, just about $1 million of that was the wastewater stabilization. So that's why I've kind of broken this out a little bit. Our unrestricted stabilization is the 2,644,000. And that's about 6.7% of our operating budget. So overall, with the general fund undesignated fund balance and our stabilization unrestricted fund balance, it's 9.482 million, which is about 24%, which is well exceeding our targets. And so there, I would say that our targets are minimum targets. So, I think it's healthy that we're above those minimum targets. Why do we have so much fund balance? Because we have favorable budgetary results, which is what I'm going to go over in a minute. And that's most evidenced by our free cash certification, which we're estimating at 5,671,000, which represents about 14% of our operating budget. But there's lots of things that go into that, but we'll talk and parse this out a little bit. Of that 5.6 million, we didn't spend all of last year's. So we didn't generate all of that this year. We generated 4.4 million. So it's not really the 14%, it's more like 11% on that basis. And then down below, I just had a couple of things I just want to point out. I always like to document the budget. These budget amounts pretty much tie to our Article 4 in our town meeting warrants. There might be differences in a particular year. For example, the $300,000 for police officers is a separate article last year. That's for 25, but that'd be a case where this number doesn't directly tie to Article 4 or Article 2, I should say, because there's other articles that were adding to the operating budget that were separately voted. So it's not always a direct tie, but basically this represents our Article 2 operating budget over the years. And we do have a couple.
Make a comment on the police officers. The
Sure.
warrant calls for 2 police officers. And information you've sent us in terms of explaining 14% increase in real estate calls for 4 officers.
Sure.
And I think we support 4 officers, but do we need to be consistent with what's in the warrant? Which calls for 2 officers and $300,000?
Well, what we asked for was funding for 2 with a
Right.
promise to get the additional 2 within the budget without asking for more money. So the funding provided by town meeting only provided for 2. And the fact that we can get 4 is because we've made budgetary adjustments within the budget otherwise to accommodate the extra 2 without asking for extra money. Because originally the request was $650,000 from the chief.
Right.
For the full 4.
So these are adjustments that were obviously made after the May meeting.
Right, and that's what we put in the warrant, that's what we were gonna try to do. We didn't ask for 650, we asked for 3, and with the promise of trying to get the additional 2 within the budget without asking for another override.
I think maybe Roy, and I have a similar type question. As Roy says, the original request was for 4 and we ended up with the override of 300,000 for 2. With the understanding that you would be looking at the budget to see how the others 2 could be paid for in some way.
Right now,
fashion.
that's an FY25 thing.
Right,
But you'll see in this 24 first review, how we were able to do that. So we'll talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about this.
yeah,
in a-
okay.
Where you're coming from.
We do have a couple other reserve funds and just want to remind people, especially for the new folks. We do have what's called an IOD fund, an injured on duty fund.
Injured on duty.
It's now up to just about $270,000. We haven't been utilizing that. We've been trying to build it up a bit. But what that will do for us, and right now we only have one who will, is on his way of being retired. And so at that point, we'll have none. So going forward in the future, we may have an opportunity to, so if a public safety employee gets injured, we're responsible for keeping, injured on duty, I should say, we're responsible for paying their salary as they rehabilitate. You know, if it's a short-term thing, 30, 60 days, usually we manage that within the budget. But sometimes as things become long-term issues, you know, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And so that's why we have this IOD fund to support that, because what happens is usually you have to fill that shift spot of that
Somebody
employee
else.
with somebody else on overtime. And so this will help stabilize the operating budget.
Can I just ask a question? Now, you mentioned it earlier on the free cash certification, the percentage of the budget of the 14.35%. Does the state not like to see a large percentage of the budget in free cash? Would
state
they
doesn't care.
look to, I mean, it's nice to have it, I'm not saying that, but by showing that you haven't used that higher percentage, would they look and see should that be reduced because your basic expenses versus the budget aren't
No.
in sync?
No.
No, okay.
And that being said, which is why I like to have this meeting, go through some of these things. It's not as attractive as it first appears. 14% sounds like it's a lot, and I agree, it's a
Yeah,
good amount. But when we get into why and how we generated it,
Mhm.
it's not as
Well,
significant as,
some of it's investment income,
well, and a big portion of it's short-term rentals.
short-term rentals.
Which we're going to be, so when you see these numbers, we got to take that with a grain of salt, because right off the top, about $1.5 million this year is going to come right out of these balances.
Mhm.
So the 6.8 million of the general fund includes $1.5 million of additional savings on short-term rentals that is going to be coming out of the unreserved fund balance when we vote to put it into the wastewater stabilization fund.
Rich, I just have a quick question and with the folks that are out potentially on disability, is this self-funded or do you have a short-term, long-term disability carrier?
No, we don't. And that's part of why I started this IOD fund.
Okay,
Provide a funding mechanism, but you're exactly,
We're self-funded.
self-funded, yeah.
we fund it through the operating budget. So
Okay.
we pay salaries for the
Mhm.
person who's out, and we pay extra overtime for the person that's filling it
Yeah,
back out of our
okay.
operating budgets.
So
That's
you
why
don't have-
overtime is high sometimes, because we have multiple people out on IOD, we have multiple shifts to fill.
Makes sense.
But to your point, that is, once we get this built up, one of the things I want to do is how are we going to implement and utilize this fund? Perhaps a policy could be something like anything over a 90 or 120 day disability is funded out of here, as long as we have sufficient funds. We could look at stop loss type policies to help pay for some of it. The problem is that historically, those things have been too expensive for the benefit they provide.
Right.
So-
And I assume there's no workers' comp involved in this either. Okay, thanks.
And then finally, we have a compensated absence fund, 125,000. I'm trying to also build that up a little bit. If we have, it's not as big of an issue as it, although we are gonna have a couple of long time employees retiring, hopefully, not hopefully, likely in the next year or so. And they will probably have some vacation and sick time buyback contractually provided. Historically, when we have those, we pay for them again out of the salary budget. So all things being equal, if you have all your positions filled and you have somebody retire and they need and they're deserving of a $20,000 buyout, usually how you finance that is you don't hire the replacement not long enough time to allow you that savings within your budget to be able to afford that buyout. Which you can do if it's just somebody getting a couple $1,000, but somebody that's getting a significant amount, it's hard to do that. So that's hence the fund. And that's part of our financial statement every year that we have to have audited is a liability for sick leave buyback or compensated absent buyback. So my goal is to get that up to about 50% of the calculated amount, because obviously we're not going to ever pay out all of it all at once, but. So. Okay, the next page kind of shows our free cash history. And again, I started for the first year, and for those that you might not know, I do this presentation every year, and I have these going back. I think this is my 5th one since I've been here. And I like to do that because we can always compare these things one year to the next and develop a trend. But new this year is I did show, since our short-term rentals are so significant, we generated $4.4 million of free cash, but we really only generated 3 million,
3 million.
excluding the short-term rental. So it's not really 11% of the budget, it's more like 7.6. And I went back and I restated that for the prior presentations for the prior years, just to be a little comparative. But the key is page 7. How did we get this free cash generated? Where did it come from? So this is the final column. And this isn't a perfect calculation of how free cash is calculated, but it's a nice simplistic way to see how it's derived. And you can see the biggest contributor of free cash, and looking under the 2024 column, is local receipts of 3,170,000.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So out of the 4.4 generated this year, 3/4 of it came from local savings on local receipts. The other biggest contributor, or all of it really contributor, was 1.6 million savings on appropriations. So you take those things, less some reductions for state receipts and tax revenue, and you get to the 4.4 and add in the amount that we didn't utilize the prior year of just about 1.3
Mhm.
gets you to
5.6.
5.6. So following pages kind of detail each of those lines and how they derive. So if you go to the next page, 8.
But before you go to page 8, Rich, could I just go back a second on, back to page 6, where you were talking about the 2024 amount generated versus the short-term rental, where it shows the 3 million for the short-term rental. But the year before, it was almost 500,000 more for short-term rental. Do you feel that the short-term rental will be decreasing like that, or?
No, I think you've
is-
got it backwards, Mary.
Hmm.
It's
What?
3.4 is more. It's excluding the short-term rental. So we generated more from $400,000 more last year from receipts other
Oh,
than
am I
short-term
looking at
rental.
me saying me? Excluding. Oh, okay, okay. I was looking at that as the short-term rental.
Well, it's excluding the short-term rental, so.
Yep, sorry.
Sorry. Page 8 just kind of shows why is there a reduction for property tax? And gets a little wonky municipal accounting wise. But if you look at the budget, that's basically our commitment that we issue in property tax bills under the budget for personal property and real estate. And we always provide for what's called an allowance for abatements and exemptions.
Hmm.
And then the actual is, and those are, especially the commitments, those are on a full accrual basis. It's all the bills issued. But the actual, the way the state requires us to record the revenue is up based on collection. It's a cash basis. So of course, if you're full accrual on both, the actual would equal the budget, but that's not how the state lets us do. We have to put the budget as accrual, but the collections, the revenue on collections on cash basis. So that's why there's a differential. And of course, we don't always collect all of our taxes. Over to the right, you see our collection percentage in the year of collection, which for the 24 was just under 98%. But that couple percent adds up to, being short. But since it's based on a cash basis, you get to add the prior year collections in.
So Rich, just a quick question. That seems pretty good, the collections.
Yes.
Where does Eastham sit sort of on an average base compared to other towns in terms of collections?
Very favorable.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like it. Thanks.
So this is where it starts to get a little confusing, a little wonky. But the bottom line is, if you look at that total property taxes, you see $172,000 deficiency. And then I want you to look in the middle of that page, you see an unbudgeted negative 188,000.
Mm, mm.
Mhm.
This is where it gets a little accounting wonkiness. If you, except for that item, if you were to take that item out, we'd be pretty much break even on this. What that item represents is an adjustment that the state makes us, requires us to make when we calculate free cash. They don't give us credit for, I hesitate even getting too much, but they don't get credit for having more overlay account than what was provided for. And so that reflects in what's called the deferred revenue account, and they don't give us credit for that. So we're forced to back it out. So it's a non-cash item, is maybe a better way to explain that. So if you take out that non-cash item, we actually have a small surplus of, like $16,000. Which makes a lot of sense, because if you look over to the right, when you see the cumulative collections over a 2-year period for the prior fiscal year, we've collected 99.95%, right? So we ought to be pretty much collecting everything that's been issued, and we have. That's just that one little wonky thing in the calculation of free cash that throws that off as a negative. State aid came in as a negative. This is relative to the budget, relates to the budget, because the reason that state aid is short is the state puts out what they call a cherry sheet of what they expect to send you for various state payments, including veteran benefits reimbursements. And they're always historically 18 months to 2 years behind on this data. You might have recalled from a previous question we had in reviewing budgets that we carry an amount in our budget to pay for veteran benefits, local veterans benefits. We just have not had any receiving benefits. So we budget for it and haven't spent anything. So we had that savings on our appropriation side. But since we didn't have any benefits to pay, we also did not get any state reimbursement.
Mhm.
So the state told us their budget for reimbursements, but they didn't actually come through. But that's property tax. It's a small impact on our free cash. The biggest impact is on page 9. This is where we'll have lots of discussion coming up in the budget season. This is our list of revenue accounts in summary form. You can see on line 1 is our whole regular traditional hotel motel excise. We budgeted 350,000, collected 562. So we have a $212,000 savings to budget. If
What do
you-
you attribute that to? The increase from 350 to,
From 350 to
Well, it's not-
562?
It's not necessarily an increase. And not here is the prior year amount. And I
Yeah,
probably should-
1,000,007.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at short-term rental, sorry.
I should have brought that so I could give it to you. So it's not an increase, it's a amount collected over what we budgeted. Because we're never gonna budget, hopefully, exactly what we received the prior year.
Excuse me.
Matter of fact, we have a financial policy that says we should be budgeting 80%. We should start our budget process at a target range of 80 to 85%. And that gives us a 15% at least cushion to weather a economic downturn without having to reduce our appropriations. And that's based on my experience and history over the years. In a moderate downturn, we're going to see a reduction of anywhere between 8 to 12% reduction in local receipts. In a more severe downturn, we'll see upwards of 15%.
Mhm.
So our local receipts can survive, a pretty significant downturn without things will get tight and we'll feel it. But theoretically, we can absorb that within our budget without having to cut or lay people off. So as you can see, in total, you see that 3,170,000 under the excess/deficiency column.
Yep.
That's the amount that's contributing to free cash. And here are all the various lines doing that. So you can see the big one is short-term rental, which we automatically know. So the total was 1.7 million, but we did budget 327,000 for debt service. So the savings is the 1.377. So we know out of that 3,170,000 that if we hold true to our prior practice and policy, 1.37 is going to automatically be going to our wastewater stabilization fund.
Mhm.
So that's why on line 18, I have, what's the excess excluding the short-term rental? It's really only 1.792, not the
Yep,
3.
yep.
Which is still pretty good. So it's 1,792,000 on a budget of 4,083,000, which means that we collected almost 44%. So we go into a year hoping to get 80 to 85% realization. I mean, we got more like 66%, which would tell us that going into the following year, all things being equal, that perhaps we have a little room there to add local receipts to the budget, to help fund the budget and move property tax. However, there's more. This year, I also backed out interest. Because on line 14, you can see interest is
Yeah,
hugely significant contributor to
Huge.
free cash,
Yeah.
809,000.
right.
That is not going to reoccur. That's largely due to some significant bond issues, primarily the $6 million wastewater bond. And we're getting a little bit of arbitrage on that with some good interest rate environments. And it's concerted effort with the Treasury Office to make sure that we're having idle cash properly invested and earning a 4 to 5% rate of return instead of sitting in a checking account. So that effort would have made this number pretty good too, but it's the $6 million bond cash that we're sitting on that we're just starting to spend now that is adding that extra interest. So can't really rely on that. So if you back that out,
Yeah.
we're down to 983,
Mm.
which is about 24%. It's still good. That puts us at about 76% we're using 76% of our actual receipts to fund our budget. And our policy is to be between 80 and 85, so still have a little bit of room. And then finally, the final thing that I reduced was for solid waste, and that's just an exercise because I kind of know what's coming. Matter of fact, we're working through it now, is that we have to renegotiate contracts with, I still call it Covanta, it's something else now, the plant off Cape that we have to bring our solid waste to. And those tipping fees are going to increase drastically, which is why we had a rate increase this past year on the dump sticker. And so any excess that we have in the solid waste fees is probably going to go to fund that projected increase in this upcoming year's budget. If we back those out, we're at 17%. So it's really not as, 3.1, $3.2 million, that's a lot of money. When you factor out some of these one-time things or other things that we do, like the short-term rentals, it's not as significant.
You're down to
as it seems.
583.
So. But certainly not bad. And other communities have had, tough situations, and select boards have wanted the town to, were very adverse to trying to increase property taxes, and they wanted 98% of whatever was earned last year to be budgeted for the next year.
Mm.
And yeah, we could do that. And then it's just inevitable though, that you're gonna get hit, and everyone will be complaining, why can't we work our way through this problem? The second most contributor to free cash is in the next page on 18, and that's our appropriations. So if you look at the bottom of the excess deficiency column on this one, you see the 1,646,000 that was on that free cash page. Now, where did that 1,600,000 come from? I'll tell you where it didn't come from first, the next line up. Almost 99.8% of our appropriations did not come from them, because out of our whole $38.6 million budget, 29 million of it only generated $380,000 of savings. About 1%, a little over 1%. So that means the other 10, that's I always list the top 10, and these are the exact top 10 I would expect to see. The biggest one being employee health insurance. If there's ever, and this is pretty traditional in most towns, if there's ever any cushion in a budget, typically it's going to be employee benefits for a number of reasons. It's the fastest growing projected trend in municipal budgeting. Health insurance is a national trend of 8 to 10%. increasing. We've been very good. We participate in what's called the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group. We're self-insured. We've had pretty moderated rates the last couple of years. And in our case, and I just happen to be involved and know a lot of the stuff, our rate is also subsidized by good experience from the health group, and they have a large fund balance, so they buy down the rate. When that ability to buy that rate down goes away because their fund balance goes away, guess what happens to our rates? They spike up. So I've been carrying a little bit of cushion for that eventuality. We've got a 15% cushion. So if you account for a potential spike it won't probably be this year, but in the next couple of years, it could be a potential spike because of no more subsidy on the rate. And you have a 10% trend, and therefore we get a rate increase of 10, 12, 13% on employee health insurance. This goes away pretty quick. I actually just attended a meeting yesterday, and this is a very small subset for us, but not inconsequential. Retiree rates, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, are projected to go up 15 to 20%.
Wow. Okay.
And that's a January 1 renewal, a mid-year renewal for us. So, so that's why we carry surplus in there. It's also, to your earlier question, Roy, one of the things I leaned on to get to the 4 officers. And I guess it still remains to be seen because we're still interviewing candidates and we got to see how it falls out. But basically, easy math. If we can get 4 officers at an average salary of $75,000, that's the $300,000.
Right.
Where,
And I'm eating the benefit costs because we
Wow.
have this surplus.
how does that salary compare to other towns?
Oh, it's comparable. It's our contractual rate.
Mhm.
And so, after this year, we'll be negotiating contracts again and doing.
I know,
all this
that's, another year, we were back to the
stuff. Right.
another 3-year issue.
But utilizing this excess on health insurance, utilizing the 300,000 for just the pure salary
Mm.
and absorbing the and maybe we get lucky, maybe we don't, maybe they're on their spouse's insurance or something. We don't have a insurance cost. The other thing that we've been active, one of the reasons, this is a huge contributor to this, but maybe $20,000 or $30,000 of the savings is last year we introduced a high deductible plan option.
Mhm.
And we've had several employees interested in that. And that saved us quite a bit of money. I'm hoping we can continue to be successful with that and generate more savings.
Rich, what's the percent of employees on the high deductible versus the traditional?
It's a low percentage. I think we got, I think maybe 14 people signed up.
Aggregate, it's usually about 10 to 15% of your employee population, but it helps.
Yeah.
This employee health insurance, Rich, is the entire pool, does that include all employees that are paid by the town of East Hingham?
All employees that are enrolled in the plan, yeah. Not
Okay.
all employees enroll in the plan.
Really?
Yeah.
So they can defer?
No, they just don't get insurance.
That's what I mean. They can
Because they're spouse. Yep. As a
decline.
matter of fact,
They can decline. Okay.
one of the things we offer is we have a health insurance buyout program. So if you don't take our insurance and you're a single employee, I think it's $2,000. If you're a family plan employee, it's $5,000. But that's a drop in the bucket if you get somebody off our plan to the $25,000 annual cost to have them on the plan.
Does the town offer healthcare and dependent care reimbursement accounts for people?
We have, I'm not sure about the dependent care. We have a traditional 125 plans.
Okay.
I don't know if that includes the dependents in that, but it's the health insurance stuff.
Yeah, they can pre-tax dollars put aside for it, yeah.
So for example, the
Prescriptions and stuff like
employees'
that.
share of premiums is pre-tax because we had it automatically run through the 125 account.
It
And they
sounds
do
like
have FSAs, and if you're on the high deductible plan, you have the HSAs.
that's what I'm talking about.
So on the
the
high
flexible
deductible plan,
spending, yeah.
so it's not as lucrative as one might think. It's about a think a 25% savings on the premium on the versus HSA versus the traditional. But then we contribute 50% of that high deductible. So if you have a $4,000 deductible, we put 2,000 in your HSA, and it's incumbent on you to withhold the rest to match that. But it's a great, especially for our public safety folks. That's why I keep preaching to them. Because they typically can retire early at 50 or 55, free Medicare. So you've got, at least 10 years before you're eligible for Medicare. So you can build up your HSA over your career, have several $1,000s in it at early retirement at 50, for us, at 55. And you use that money to pay your premiums before you're Medicare eligible.
It sounds like the pool is, you said low utilization, which is, all you need is one big thing that happens and it can, I guess it's good fortune that nothing's happened.
Well, the pool that we belong in, the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, has almost all the towns on the Cape. It's over 12,000 subscribers. It's almost $200 million of annual claims run through. So we're pooled with bigger participants. So the risk, we've laid off a lot of risk. And we don't bear that risk at all directly.
It's great. Really good.
So health insurance is the biggest contributor to that, 1.6 million. The next biggest is a salary account, and that's savings on overtime, essentially, is what that is. And unfilled, I'm sorry, not overtime. We overspent overtime on the fire, but we had significant vacancies. So because of those vacancies, we had to overspend on our overtime to fill the shifts, but we didn't have the salary slots filled, so we didn't pay the regular payroll. We can't budget. Every year there's savings on salary appropriations in one form or fashion, but we can't budget that way. We're required to budget 100% of the expected salary costs. Our reserve fund is number 3. We didn't utilize the reserve fund, and that's I attribute to, we did have some use of it, but we didn't have any snow and ice use this year, which is atypical for us. Usually we got, 100, 120,000. And if we had that this year, then that would have been used up.
Well, that's the money, the finance committee.
Right.
Yeah.
Energy is a little bit of a savings. Well, it's a significant to its line, but again, that's an intentional thing. We're coming into a new contract, energy supply contract this fiscal year that went up 30% on the rate. And we just had a meeting with renewing a natural gas supply contract, and that had a significant increase as well.
We were expecting that. I mean, the one that we had a contract that we had for about 3 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So we knew that was.
So we always try to plan ahead and build
Going
these
up.
things up gradually so that we don't run short in any one year. Because a lot of towns, aren't on top of these things the way we are, and they'll get caught and they'll end up being short on their budget. So I don't want to do that, A, and B, I don't want any of these budgets to spike up hugely in any one year if we can help it. So when we foresee that we're on a very favorable 3-year contract and you read the tea leaves of what's going to happen after that, you build in a little provision to build up so that
So
fourth
that
year
when that
comes,
hits, you've got something
you've
in
provided
reserve.
for some of it.
So will you continue to do that then after the new rates hit? So you said it could increase 30%. Will you then budget a cushion in energy, or do you wait like a year or two?
Well, in this case, it's a 2-year contract. So I don't have much time to do that.
Do it, so you really have to do it.
So in both cases of the energy and the employee health insurance, I would expect these savings to come, all things being equal, I'd expect these savings to come down next year because I'm utilizing that $500,000 for the 4 new police officers. And I'm absorbing a lot of that 30% supply rate increase in the energy. General insurance is similar. That's another area where you have about an 8% increase per year. And we've been very lucky. Employment costs is almost similar to the reserve fund. That's showing a lot of savings because within that employment cost category is what we call the salary reserve account of $60,000. And that's so that the town manager can, get employees to show up and hire employees if we need to be competitive at a mid-year adjustment, or perhaps a employee that was at a low rate, their replacement is maybe a mid-career professional coming in and justifies a higher rate. It gives her the flexibility to transfer from the salary reserve to the departmental salary budget to cover that.
Is that like a signing bonus too? If
It could be.
an incentive to, so it has broad use.
It's also used typically, in this case, we didn't use it at all this year. That's why, and that's a $60,000 account. So that's basically all that savings. But it also goes if we have to, and sometimes we want to reclassify employee. Sometimes we're not necessarily forced, but, unions make requests to reclassify employee based on work being performed. So we have use it for reclassifications during the year as well. Facilities, salaries, and IT salaries, just vacancies that had occurred. And then, of course, at the bottom there, you see veteran services for 41,000, basically represents all of our budget for, the amount I think it's actually 40,000 exactly that we provide, for veteran benefits locally, and none of it got used. We didn't have any veterans participating, which is unusual. So over on the left here, I've kind of put some stats, starting from the top level and working way down. Savings on appropriations of 1.6 represents about 4.26% of our budget. S&P target, which I'll get to in a second, to be considered very strong in this area would be over 5%. When you take the top 10 accounts into account, that's 1.2 of the 1.6 million. So very small percentage when you look at the number of accounts we have large savings. Almost all of it's from these 10 that we just discussed. And the reason that's important is because when we start getting to the budget review for the upcoming year, these things are going to come up again. Salary accounts, we budget at 100%, except for overtime, because we can't rely on vacancies to occur. So the savings without salary accounts is 1.1 million or 2.8%. So just on their pure expense accounts, 2.8% out of 38 million isn't huge. It's a good amount of money, but it's not a huge percentage wise. The total salary savings on 11.1 million of salary budget is 545, so about 4.9. But if you exclude the salary budgets in the top 10, it's only 190,000. Total expenditure savings on $27.3 million expenditure budgets is $911,000, about 3.3%. Again, if you back up any of those expense accounts that are in the top 10, the savings is only 196,000. So this indicates to me, other than these 10 that we focused on, we're pretty tight on our budgets. And then we need to back out the reserve accounts as well. $260,000 of saving came from our reserve accounts. I'm sorry, 189,000. 200 for the finance committee, 60 for the salary reserve. And 189 of it was saved. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. We went through the key contributors to free cash, which indicate that strong financial position that we're in. I'm going to jump ahead just for a second and ask you to go to page 14.
Page what?
14
Oh, back.
forward.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking, looked like 18, it's 14.
One that says Standard and Poor's rating criteria. I'm, kind of a nerd with this type of stuff. And I helped develop a lot of these criteria back in the day. We are in almost every area we can control, except for one. We are, I shouldn't say it that way. We're very strong where we can be very strong. Even though technically debt and contingent liabilities shown on the bottom here is technically controllable. I came in well after the fact. I can't do anything about what's happened, and I can't really do anything about wastewater. It kind of is what it is. We're considered very weak because we have a high level of debt. The only thing left for us to do better on, as far as S&P is concerned, is this budgetary performance score, which instead of a very strong is we're strong. and I've done the calculations, if we were very strong, we just get enough grading to get to a AAA. Being very strong in all these calculations offsets the very weak on debt.
Mm.
But in order to do that, we need to be generating budgetary savings, which is what we just talked about. And what they want to see is budgetary savings in excess of 5%
5%.
on the appropriation side.
So
So-
if you get that, that would push us up to AAA.
Yes. And that may or may not be significant. Now you'd say, hey, we've got a lot of borrowing for wastewater coming up. That makes sense that being a AAA would save you money on that debt.
Mhm.
But it might not, because if most of our debt is through the SRF program and at a 0% rate, you
Mm.
can't get better than
Yeah,
the
yeah,
0%
yeah,
rate.
right.
So is there a value in being a AAA? Not sure yet.
What do you have to do to get a very strong institutional framework? I thought you were already there.
Nothing. Those top two are uncontrollable. It's that considers the political environment of the state and all kinds of things that are out of our local control. So that's the meat of the presentation. There's some other things I could point out to you, but do you have any questions?
I do have a concern about the taxes that we're in the, well, maybe I should wait for that for the
Yeah.
next time. Okay.
Well, I will speak to that too, because that is one of their pages.
Yeah.
Let me just go real quickly now through the rest of this. If you go back to 11, that does show the outstanding debt. Our trend. You can see as of June 30th, 24, our debt is at 111 million, up from 98 million the prior year.
Right.
And you can see the upward trend over the years.
Mhm.
And, the bigger concern really for me and the community really is the debt service amount at the bottom. Back in
16.47%.
18, it was 3.5 million. Now we're 6.5 million.
Yeah.
And that 6.5 million represents 16.5% of our overall operating
That's
budget.
right.
It's become, it's a big number for us.
Yeah, that concerns me.
Well, listen, I understand that and it concerns everybody, but the only thing you can do is not to vote a project. Once you vote the project, you kind of have to pay it back.
Right.
And so this is a conversation I'm sure we'll be having. It's very hard to balance the budget and maintain and I think that's what the memo kind of indicates. We've done a pretty good job managing our operating budget and limiting increases, but it's almost impossible to offset the cost of the increasing debt on the back of the operating budget.
You expect the need to issue debt in 25, 26?
Yes. That was in our debt projection, our capital projection a month or two ago. Yeah, at a minimum, the last piece of the water project debt. The next page kind of shows our pension obligations. Again, we participate in the Barnstable County Retirement Association. They had a bit of a downturn. And I should say downturn. I don't know that it was a downturn in investment or asset wise. Actually, I suppose it was, if looking at this. But it was that combined with, I think we had a lot of retirements during COVID and post-COVID, and our benefit payments have increased.
Yeah.
So that was significant. But we're still on target to be fully funded in our pension plan by the year 2037. But see, it used to seem like a long way away. So
No,
now it's like,
2037. That's
but one of the key things here,
13 years from now.
you look at this line, it says assessment slash total assessment slash catch up. I like to do that because that goes to what's the impact of post-retirement benefits for retirees. We are playing catch up
Yeah.
and hopefully by the year 2037, we're caught up. Well, what's that look like? Well, what it looks like is based on these 24 numbers, our assessment, if we didn't have to be playing catch up, wouldn't be 2,261,000. It would be 2,261,000 minus 1,659,000 that we're paying to amortize or catch up on our debt. So what's that? It's like $500,000. So our assessment goes from 2.2 million to $500,000, a huge budgetary savings for us in the year 2037. So we got something to look forward to.
Well, you're leaving a legacy, Rich.
Ah,
So this translates to the next page on OPEB, because as you can see, we're not very well funded on OPEB. But part of the plan would be to take that $1.6 million of savings from the pension in the year 2037. And in 2038, start using it and putting it towards the OPEB and get caught up to that. Thinking ahead.
So on page 12. And I know they're going by 2-year periods here. Why the increase from 2022, 14 million, $7 million to 21 million?
On the net pension liability?
I think the biggest,
That's a question I had too.
yeah, I think the biggest driver of that is the rate of retirees that we have coming into the system in those 2 years. Or it's like, it's not even the last 2 years, because it's at least a year, if not 18-month lagging
Yeah.
indicator. Because everything they do is actual studies based on historical data.
Right.
So again, I think we had a lot of retirements during and post-pandemic,
Mm.
and you're seeing them hitting the system. Yep.
Yeah.
And you can see up above under assets. Didn't have any growth in the assets. But I think if, hopefully, once we get an update at the end of this year, we've had a really good year in the stock market this year, so hopefully those assets are climbing back up. I'm gonna wrap up on this page here, which is to the heart of what I know is on everybody's mind, page 16. Kind of segue into. I like to show comparative data, and you can look at it amongst all the other towns however you want. But I did want to speak specifically to this one. And this is the property tax. Oh, I got the wrong, I'm sorry, that's the wrong page.
Did you mean
17.
page 17?
Yeah. This is the property tax burden, all Cape Cod towns. Now, it's really tough to do this for a number of reasons. So, for example, Barnstable always looks really good. But you know what Barnstable doesn't have? 5 fire districts that are separate taxing entities within the town borders that also send tax bills to their residents. So when you contemplate and add that in, all of a sudden they don't look so favorable. So I have a little asterisk. All these towns, especially Upper Cape, have extra districts that also tax their taxpayers that aren't reflected in these numbers. So we got to take a little bit of a grain of salt. But not unsurprisingly, Dennis is historically and still is the lowest tax community on the Cape, followed by Yarmouth. And then historically, Eastham was number 3. And we're dropping out of that position because we're taking on these big projects. Water is hitting its conclusion, and we just started to add on wastewater for not an insubstantial amount. So those things cost money, plus 2 high schools, one for Cape Cod Tech and one for Nauset. And so you absorb those things, it did knock us down out of the 3rd, but we're put in pretty much now in the range of most of our peer communities. And lower than all the other Outer Cape communities. When you look at the dollar cost of an average single family tax bill.
You expect that we're going to need to issue debt or contribute to the Nauset Regional High School debt for 25, 26?
Oh, we already are. We already are. That's reflective in the 24 results. In 24, we started the funding. 25 budget that we just passed was substantially all of the Nauset debt service. There'll be a small remaining piece that comes on board in 26, but most of it was in 24 and 25.
Are those 30-year bonds?
25 years. If you look, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you look one line up from Eastham to Orleans, it's a pretty good comparison.
Oh, yeah.
They're similar, the big difference is the wealth factor of Orleans compared to our residents. But the similar position in that their increase here represents onboarding of wastewater debt. They're quite a bit ahead of us a number of years ahead of us in actually constructing a wastewater treatment plant and production system, and they're starting to pay that debt service, and they still have several phases to go. But what they had that we didn't is their water system is well developed historically over
Further along with
30,
with
40
the
years.
Mhm.
And
wastewater.
all that debt is bypassed. But that's, I hate to say it, but that's probably our future as we bring on debt for other things.
I do think it's interesting, they show on the DOR income per capita. The last amount on here was for 2021 of 50,199.
Yep.
And last year, when we had our, the assessing folks gave us their presentation, they had our income per capita is at 39.
Yep.
So our per capita income is one of the smallest of all of the towns.
Right. So it's
So
a good
that's
point.
my concern.
Right, and that's why I show it this way. So, the actual dollars are important, great, $5,800 or whatever, $5,600. Doesn't sound so bad. No,
But
if
it's.
it is if you're making,
That's right.
if you're making $10,000,
That's
it's
right.
half your income, right?
That's right.
But if you're making $200,000, then, percentage
And
wise,
I think that's the issue that we have, on the Cape here, we have the taxes, but we don't have the income for the people to pay the taxes.
and I think generally, just being from around here, I understand that and I agree with you.
Mhm.
But but the thing we gotta keep in mind, and this was more pervasive up Cape, is retirees might not have a high amount of income because they're drawing off of assets, so then, they dilute that per capita rate. And I
Right.
don't know if how impactful it is or isn't. And the other thing, I hate to say it, but we do have a pretty vibrant underground economy here on Cape Cod and a lot of unreported income.
Mm.
And so that's a factor too. And so, I don't know if it's more or less than other communities might have, but just, being an old
So, but so-
Wellfletian,
so are
I
you
get
saying-
suspicious about things like this.
So are you saying that the DRR figures here shouldn't be?
I think it's a measure and I think we should pay attention to it and
Mm.
not, I think it's important to know, but we have to contemplate, other things like you're drawing off, investments that you've accumulated for many years, perhaps.
It might be interesting too, I think, if we were to value this on net worth, because speaking personally, my home, what I purchased it for and what its value is now is quite different. So, yes, if your home is worth a lot of money, that doesn't give you cash flow.
Right.
But I think it's interesting.
The other thing here is in Eastham, we do not have, when it comes to taxable property, we don't have much commercial property.
No, we have
Right.
very little, 2.9%.
Yeah, no, that's, a big example. Yarmouth is a great example. I did a lot of work in Yarmouth over the years. And I actually did a study for them at one point back in the mid 80s, the late 80s. I think, roughly around the ballpark of 20% commercial, 80% residential. And then we just did a timeline and you see it every year just dropping off little by little by little. So nowadays, they're less than 10% commercial to residential. It's like probably 8.5%.
Are we the least, are we the smallest in terms of
Commercial.
commercial?
We're all pretty much similar on the outer Cape.
I would think,
There's just
yeah.
a very-
Except for
True.
Provincetown
True, might be lower than us.
but Truro tax rate is, if you look at that, it's quite high.
Well, and I don't know if their rate's high, but their tax bill is high.
Right.
Mm.
And so remember, a town like Chatham is gonna have a very low tax rate, but a high tax bill because
Yeah,
your
the-
property's worth $2
The
million.
property values down there are very high.
So that's why I like to show the rates and the actual dollar impacts.
Just a question. Have you gotten a lot of feedback from people around the new tax rate per thousand?
I wouldn't say a lot,
I just was,
probably pretty much the same, maybe other than maybe one or two people that weren't particularly happy.
that are on Facebook,
Um,
a lot.
Well, the people on Facebook are the same people that complain about everything on Facebook, and I'm not, not calling them out for that because,
No,
that's their right.
and what
Um,
we have said to them is instead of doing this, go to town hall and have a conversation. So I just was curious. if
Well, that's why I
people
put
are
that memo together.
asking For
Yeah,
me,
yeah, that
meetings,
memo was
We
very
only
good,
had,
by the way.
really good.
We had one person I had to go talk to outside the tax collector's office. We had two people thinking, they don't like the taxes, but they're not fighting the taxes. They're fighting, they think their property is overvalued. And then I looked it
Mm.
up, he's on the water. One condo association thinks that they have a case, and maybe they do. That's why we have an appellate tax board. I'm happy to help them through that. But, for example, condos increased in value disproportionately to regular single-family homes this past year. And I think intuitively, you probably knew that because those were affordable properties, so people were buying them and paying a premium that they might not have in the past. So things like that have happened, but other than those one or two cases, I don't think it's any more pervasive than the usual stuff.
That's good.
Nobody likes paying taxes, I get it. But I do think, and which is why I wrote the memo, and if you want to talk about that, we can talk about that. We get good services for what we do, and we've done a good job, I think, controlling the operating budget. And, just some things that are not out of control. We can't do much. The schools send us a bill, we don't have much say over the schools. We don't have much say over special ed. And if you want clean water and you want, clean drinking water and not polluted embayments, then we have to do water and wastewater. And those are very expensive projects. So that's why I keep pushing the whole thing with the short-term rental. A couple people on the finance committee always kind of wanted to use the short-term rentals to help supplement the operating budget and lower the taxes. We could have done that. That's fine. Tell me what you want to do. We'll come to a consensus and we'll do that. But if you do that, now you're going to have full boat on your tax levy when it comes to pay the debt service on the wastewater. And so, unfortunately, the cost of wastewater is getting so expensive, even that doesn't seem like it's
That-
very
yeah, that's-
helpful.
yeah.
But back in the day when we thought wastewater was going to be maybe $3-4 million of debt service a year, our short-term rentals are going to kind of cover half of that.
Mhm.
And we're going to get another 25% from the Water Protection Trust, which means we're going to come up with,
Right.
15-20% of the total cost.
So if we issue debt for wastewater management, is that gonna be 0%?
Well, you hope it is. It's not a guarantee. And that's a significant,
When
I
will you
was,
know?
we won't know until we've had to approve it. That's
right.
the problem. But I've had conversations with people at the SRF, and I do see the landscape. It's all based on available funds and other projects that they have to commit funds to. Well, Dennis just approved a project. Barnstable had a projects approved. Falmouth is coming on board. Yarmouth is coming on. They've started their project. So you can see all these projects in Cape wide, the wastewater, cost is probably approaching, if not over, $6 billion. So if you have the state SRF revolving loan fund getting $6 billion of requests, is there enough money to go all the way around?
No.
So you want to be at the front of the line. So that is a little bit of a sense of urgency for us, is to get favorable funding from state revolving loan fund and the 25% reimbursement from the Water Protection Trust. Because when all these projects come to fruition,
You have the money.
you don't want to be at the end of that line.
Now, how do you get to the front of the line?
You got to have an approved project by town meeting, and you got to submit your applications to SRF.
And are we ready for next May to do that?
Yeah, we will be. And this is, something I got to work with Jackie on. We'll be ready for town meeting, but we have done enough outreach and communication to make people understand it. And the problem is we don't necessarily have all the information we need to be giving effective communications, so. So it is a crunch.
Any other comments or questions on? And again, I want to thank you, Rich, for
Always.
the paper, I'll call it a paper that you put together regarding the taxes and outlining where the increases are occurring and why, et cetera. I thought it was very helpful. Okay,
I use this one here I go to a bi-weekly breakfast.
yeah, that's the one I'm referring to.
This one here,
Yes,
I brought this to the meeting for the hell of it, because I figured something was going to come up. So I use this as my cheat. And it kept them quiet. I've got to say that.
I did the same
Good
thing.
for you,
I did the
Roy.
same thing
That's
with my
great.
neighbors.
Good.
They, what are you doing about this? Well,
Mhm,
can I show
mhm.
you a rich truck, please?
I made a bar graph. based on-
I'm sorry, what?
I ran out of color in my
Oh.
printer, but I used I just loaded it into Excel and made a bar graph and I showed it to my husband because he's a marketing guy, he's not an accountant, but looking at it, it's not it's a responsible budget. It's not like we went.
Right.
Our
crazy
operating
about
budget came in
spending.
less than 3%.
Everything, I color coded things that were voted on at town meeting and it was in the it was in the warrant, what the taxes were gonna go up by, so people have seen it. They just don't, maybe they don't.
Probably
pay
didn't look
attention.
at it. Yeah.
They never
Look at it.
realized it.
But you were like we were right on the money with it, so people have been warned, nobody wants to see their taxes go up, me included, but most of the stuff was from the town meeting and it's debt and it's
Well,
not.
it's what are you getting for the dollars,
Mhm.
honestly? I mean, I think even the biggest naysayers will admit that when they call the police department and the fire department, they want them to show up. Or,
Yeah.
that they want, people inspecting properties, that they're not gonna be dilapidated buildings that are falling down because it wasn't built properly. There's value into a lot of what we do. But, the big projects coming on in the last 5 years certainly are very impactful, so.
So I just want to go on to item number 5 just quickly, and then I think what I'm recommending is that we delay a discussion on old business until our next meeting. We have discussed most of those items at the prior meeting. So just on the new business and sort of fits in with what we've just been discussing, because as I said, I think people do have some questions as discussed here regarding the $7.71 dollars per thousand for the fiscal year 25. And how are there things that the finance committee can do to try to assist folks that have some issues? We all know that the number of people in town over 60 is large, that a majority of them, I will say, are probably on fixed incomes. And there has been a discussion, well, the RTE, the residential tax exemption, that is one option for the towns, did not pass at the most recent select board meeting that failed on a 3-to-1 basis. It'll be discussed again in January. And I just want everybody to know that Peter and I met with Rich maybe a month ago now on the 3% surcharge that is added on to everybody's tax bill for the CPA projects. The town of Brewster did last year in their warrant pass a article saying that they would exempt certain folks from paying the 3%, which would help the folks that have some financial issues. And as I said, Rich and Peter and I met to discuss it. And I think what we need to do, at that meeting, Jerry was not there from the select board. And we needed to do some investigation on.
Yeah, so the long and short of it is, it's an elderly and, not disabled, I can't think of the word, but there's an exemption largely for elderly. So if you qualify income qualify for the any of the other exemptions that most of our people that qualify already get. Our assessor's office does a good job of outreach to get people in the door that are deserving of the exemptions. You will also qualify for the CPA exemption. And I did the math with our assessor, and it would cost about $12,000, I think,
Mm.
of CPA revenue
Right.
that we wouldn't get.
That would just be the
So-
tax, not the
Not assessing the
potential
tax.
matching.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't, if it's just 12%, 12,000, it wouldn't be, the match would be very little.
Right. So when we talk about, and I probably should have said this, given it really isn't a lot of choice in a lot of our budgetary decisions. I mean, you make a lot of choices, but the big ones, we don't have a lot of choices. Either you do wastewater or you don't. And if you do it, that's going to be very expensive. So I think my approach is sometimes it's hard to avoid some of these costs and they're going to be there. So what can we do to soften that blow? And so that's the annual discussion we have with the select board. We do have the community fund, and that's going to, this year, this is going to provide supports to people in need under the age of 60, because that's always been the select board's concern, is that over a certain age, there are supports in place statutorily. The community fund will help those under age 60. Having this exemption can be part of that discussion, so provide additional support. But going forward, what other supports can we put in place so that when there's a $600 or whatever increase in your property tax bill, can you take advantage of something that helps soften the blow for those in need?
Mhm.
I mean, you can't soften the blow for everybody,
Yeah.
but
But I think it might show that we are we understand that people have financial issues. That we are aware of it, that we are trying to think of things that would assist some of those people that are in that situation. Do we need to do anything between now and January when the RTE comes up for discussion
it's,
again?
we already talked about it. It's gonna be a select board discussion. I mean, ultimately, it's up to them to place it on the warrant, so
Right,
I'm presuming that they probably would,
okay,
but
okay.
you know, that's their discussion and their prerogative.
Mhm.
But if it goes on the warrant, then finance committee is gonna make a recommendation on it, right? So
Could we potentially, and maybe I'm way off base here, but perhaps hosting events here at town hall, conversations, hate to say it, Rich, you do such a great job of explaining this stuff, conversations with you, but on the other side of it, I kind of feel like if people have concerns and issues, rather than talking out there to their neighbors and getting everybody sort of fired up, if we had something here where a round table where people could just come in
Well, we
and
did
have a
that last year.
conversation.
So we had a little budget summit meeting last year
Mhm.
prior to the pre-town meeting.
Mhm.
Open to the public,
Had,
obviously.
well, maybe 10 or so people.
Okay, so we advertise it more and
And
just say,
then-
you know,
And then we had the pre-town meeting.
Pre-town meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
We have the pre-town meeting and you also had just an ad hoc with you and Jackie, yeah.
Yeah, but we could do a better job. You know, I think we probably will do that again this year. The budget summit open to the public, the pre-town meeting. But in between, I could put myself out there and hey, if you want to just come in and have some people don't like meetings. Want to have a one-on-one, that's fine. I'm not
cup of
doing anything, just
coffee,
sitting around.
cup of tea,
Happened means-
shot of vodka.
I just write 8-page memos.
So would it be a pain in the butt the next time the tax bill goes out? That I get a letter saying, look, Brown, if this is a problem for you, here are the things that are available.
Tools. Yeah.
Well, not tools, but
Programs.
programs that are available to
Yeah.
you. You don't have to pay this, you get a discount on that, veterans. Right? Can we
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah, we probably
This-
do better,
this-
especially with the
this was-
community.
This was an interesting thing that I went to a program at the Council on Aging on the various tax.
Well, we got all
Yeah.
kinds of marketing materials and literature, but I think to Paul's point,
Just
send it with the bill.
Send it with the bill, right?
It's a little more timely, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, no, because I think something like that would be great,
Perfect.
and I'm sure not everybody knows what's available to them.
Mhm.
So,
And not only that, I think a lot of people Some people probably didn't even
Just show this to me.
notice. They just know that things are gonna go up.
Can you reach it?
With
Well,
inflation.
they noticed the number, believe me, I heard they noticed the number.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that, cause I don't know what's available if you're under 60, right? I mean, and,
Well, it just passed, so it
okay, but.
literally just got it, so.
Okay, but yeah, if we could do that, I think it would be helpful.
All things are helpful.
And
And the final thing, just to throw it out there, is put it in your mind's eye a little bit. It's gonna be an uncomfortable discussion at some point, but given the cost of wastewater, one of the things that we'll probably put on the table, and you may support it or decide that it's not worth it. And then that, that's great, if that's the case. But we've had the Community Preservation Act and formerly the Land Bank for 30 years. The CPA sunset in 2021, I think it was. And so now we have the option to outright repeal it. You could do that. That saves everybody 3%. I would submit that this might not be the approach, but what we might want to do is reprioritize what we do with whatever 3% surcharge we have. So for example, there's now what's called a water infrastructure fund, which is, guess what, a 3% surcharge you can put on property taxes for water and wastewater infrastructure. So maybe we replace the CPA with that so that we're directing the money to our biggest priority in town. Or it doesn't have to be 3%, it could be a fraction of it. It could be 1%, 2%, 1.5%, 1.5%,
Yep.
and split it. Recognizing the fact that some of the purposes of the CPA that were important back in the day, open space, things like that, are still important, but not as important as the wastewater need. And we have this, $6 million of debt service that we got to cover somehow.
Well, we currently take in about $1 million in the CPA tax. And we take in about 250,000 in the matching funds. And what you're saying, and we talked about, is say instead of the 3% all going to CPA projects, say 1.5% going to wastewater and 1.5% staying with the CPA projects. And that's something that we would have to discuss down the road too.
That pays $15 million of that.
Mhm.
I just think transparency is just really important. If people want to have the conversations, have them directly rather than standing on,
Mm.
First Encounter Beach with a bunch of your friends
Mm.
touting.
And while we're talking about this type of stuff, I just want to ask what we would need to do as far as a stabilization fund for the special ed stuff.
We'll have to talk about that. Talk about that one a little bit. I probably have a different position than most people. Not sure. I didn't have to go back and check the regulations and see if something changed, but there really isn't a need for a special education stabilization fund. Because that comes with it certain responsibilities of different parties.
Mhm.
So do you want the school committee in charge of that fund? Or do you want us to be in charge of that fund and applying it when we think it's it's important is that we have a stabilization fund, period.
Yeah.
I don't need to pigeonhole it to a particular interest.
Mhm.
So in my mind, let's just keep an unrestricted stabilization fund and know mentally that we've, earmarked some of this money.
For special ed.
Yeah,
Good point.
right. Too many cooks in the kitchen.
So, and if that were the approach we took, then there's nothing we need to do. We already have one. We just need to put the money in it.
Mhm. So we would it be all put into have to be all put into one big pot, or could it be a stabilization fund for monies for this and monies for that?
We can earmark it within the fund,
Okay.
accounting
okay.
wise.
Like we do for the family support package.
Right.
Okay. All righty. So Jackie's here, and there was not another town manager's report other than the one that I sent out to you a week or so ago. Is there any other discussion, question, comment, etc.?
Thank you, Rich.
Anybody have another thought? Our next meeting is scheduled for November 14th at 4 o'clock. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
You do.
I'll do Patty, and then I'll do
It's Kate.
Kate,
Kate.
I'll second it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you both spoke up at the same time.
No, I said I would,
Oh, okay.
Kate and Patty's seconding.
Oh, oh,
We gotta stop sitting next to each other.
Kate, Patty, okay. Any discussion? All in favor of adjourning? 5-0, and it is 6:10.